The cursor hovered over my personal server profile for exactly 3 seconds before he clicked delete. Brody Albright did not even look at me when he did it. He just kept that smug grin plastered across his face while the confirmation dialog flashed on his screen. "You do not own this code," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. The server icon blinked once, twice, then vanished. That was when everything went dark. Every monitor in the building flickered to black. The hum of servers in the next room stuttered, then died. Someone down the hall screamed. Brody's face went from smug to ghost white in under 2 seconds. And me? I closed my laptop, slid it into my leather bag, and smiled. The whole corporate database had just erased itself. Before anyone could process what was happening, I was already standing, my messenger bag over my shoulder, walking toward the exit like I had just finished a regular Tuesday. Behind me, chaos erupted. Voices were overlapping, phones were ringing, and someone was yelling about backup protocols. Brody sat frozen at his desk, his mouse clicking frantically at a screen that showed nothing but an error message in brutal red text. I did not look back. My name is Derek Vance, Senior Systems Architect at Vanguard Health Systems, a mid-sized medical technology firm in Portland that specialized in database management for healthcare providers. 18 years I had given them. 18 years of late nights, weekend emergency calls, and building something from the ground up that actually worked. My roots were not in Silicon Valley mansions or legacy tech money. I grew up in a split-level ranch in Oregon where my dad fixed diesel trucks in the driveway, and my mom managed the books for 5 local businesses on a dining table covered in receipts and coffee rings. They taught me 2 things. They taught me how to solve problems nobody else wanted to touch, and how to remember what it felt like to need someone to give a damn. That second lesson mattered more than people think. Empathy is not a weakness in technology. It is architecture. It is understanding that the code you write at 2 in the morning affects the nurse pulling a patient record at 2 in the afternoon. It is remembering that servers are not just metal boxes. They are critical infrastructure for human beings, trying to do their jobs. Brody Albright never learned that lesson. Brody arrived on a rainy Monday in October, carrying a titanium briefcase and wearing a designer suit that cost more than my first truck. The executive team introduced him as our new Director of Technology Operations, a title that apparently meant he supervised everything I had built without understanding a single line of it. His resume sparkled. Caltech graduate, 4 years at a Bay Area startup that got acquired, 3 years consulting for firms that paid obscene rates for mediocre advice. He had the confidence of someone who had never actually broken anything important enough to learn from his mistakes. I knew we were in trouble during his very first team meeting. "I have reviewed the current infrastructure," Brody announced, not bothering with pleasantries or introductions. He pulled up a slide deck full of buzzwords and consulting frameworks that had nothing to do with our actual systems. "Frankly, what I am seeing is inefficiency, redundancy, and a lack of modern DevOps principles." He said DevOps principles like it was a magic spell that would solve all our problems. Sean Gable, one of our senior developers, raised his hand. "The current database architecture has maintained 99.96% uptime over 6 years, Sean said. "The redundancy is intentional. Healthcare data cannot go down." Brody's smile did not reach his eyes. "Uptime is fine, but efficiency matters more. We need to streamline, cut operational costs, and modernize the stack." I should have said something then. I should have pushed back. But 18 years in this industry had taught me to pick my battles, and I figured Brody would crash into reality soon enough on his own. I was right about the crash, but I was wrong about the timeline. During his first week, Brody started scheduling daily optimization meetings, hour-long sessions where he would pontificate about cloud migrations and containerization, while the rest of us tried not to check our phones. He loved the sound of his own voice, throwing around terms like paradigm shift and synergistic integration. During his second week, Brody started making changes. They were small things at first, like adjusting monitoring thresholds without consulting anyone, reassigning tickets based on what he thought was important rather than actual priority, and sending emails at midnight demanding status updates on projects that were already completed. By the third week, he had started targeting me specifically. It began with a meeting request that popped up on my screen. The subject line read Infrastructure Review of Custom Projects. There was no agenda, no context, just a calendar invite for 3 in the afternoon on a Friday. It was the universal corporate time slot for conversations that were never going to be pleasant. I showed up prepared. I brought documentation, performance metrics, and incident reports showing our stability. Brody sat behind his new desk. He had already redecorated the office with minimalist furniture and a standing desk he never actually used, with his laptop angled so I could not see the screen. "Derek," he started, not bothering with small talk. "I've been digging into our server architecture, and I am concerned about what I am finding in the directories." Brody spun his laptop around to show me the screen. On it was a directory tree of our server infrastructure, with one folder highlighted in bright yellow. The directory was named Raw Professional. It was my personal workspace. Every systems architect and developer at Vanguard Health Systems had a dedicated space on the server to store custom scripts, automation templates, and utility tools that made the daily job run smoothly, but were not officially part of the production codebase. Mine was far more extensive than anyone else's, because I had been with the company for 18 years and has built a substantial library of operational tools from scratch. I had spent countless nights and weekends refining these scripts, ensuring they integrated seamlessly with our database nodes. Every script in my directory was documented in our internal wiki with clear notes, and they had all been approved by the previous director of technology operations before his retirement. "This directory," Brody said, tapping the screen with a manicured fingernail, "represents a significant security liability. Personal directories on production servers, filled with undocumented and unaudited code, are unacceptable under my management. For all I know, you could be running scripts that compromise our security protocols." I kept my expression neutral and my voice calm. "That folder contains database optimization scripts, automated backup verifications, and system health monitors that I designed myself," I explained. "Furthermore, under my specialized employment agreement, the proprietary algorithms within those tools remain my personal intellectual property. I granted Vanguard Health Systems a non-exclusive, revocable license to run them, but that license is legally bound to the existence of my server profile. If that profile is deleted, the license terminates, meaning any attempt to replicate or restore my code from backups would violate federal copyright laws under Title 17, United States Code, Section 106. Brody scoffed, leaning back in his leather executive chair. "That is not how corporate intellectual property works, Derek. You wrote it while working here, so it belongs to us. I do not care about some outdated legacy agreement, and our legal team would laugh you out of the courtroom. Besides, corporate policies override any personal arrangements you made years ago. I will need a complete audit of every script in that directory, written justification for why each one needs to exist, and a comprehensive migration plan to move anything critical to our official repositories." The implication was clear. He wanted me to spend weeks writing documentation so he could justify deleting my tools anyway. I spent the next 2 weeks compiling the documentation, writing a detailed 58-page manual explaining how each tool worked and how it integrated with the main database. I sent it to Brody, but he never read it. Every email I sent was answered with a robotic one-line reply stating that it was received and under review and we would discuss it later. Meanwhile, Brody began implementing much larger changes across the department that disrupted our daily workflows. He fired Diana Foley, our senior infrastructure support specialist, who had been with Vanguard for 27 years, and replaced her with a cheap contractor who had zero experience with medical databases. Diana was the heart of our support team, the person who kept our physical servers running during storms and power outages. To cut operational costs, Brody canceled our primary automated server monitoring subscription, declaring that we could monitor the infrastructure manually. He then acted surprised and blamed the developers when we missed a minor database outage because no automated alerts were generated. Next, Brody pushed a streamlining initiative that involved deleting developer comments from our source code files because he claimed they cluttered the repository. The tech team began to fall apart. Sean Gable put in his resignation notice, followed by 3 other senior developers who were tired of the constant micromanagement. I should have left as well. My resume was strong enough to secure interviews at any major tech firm in the Pacific Northwest, and my professional network was extensive. But there was something about abandoning the database systems I had built, systems that actual hospitals and clinics relied on to access patient records, that felt like leaving a ship to sink. So I stayed, I documented my scripts, and I watched Brody dismantle 18 years of careful engineering with the confidence of someone who had never actually had to fix anything himself. The breaking point arrived on a Thursday morning in November. I was in the physical server room, running a routine hardware diagnostic on our primary storage array. The heavy security door opened, and Brody walked in, followed by 2 men in dark suits whom I did not recognize. "Derek," Brody said, "these are compliance auditors from the corporate headquarters. They are here to perform an unscheduled review of our data security compliance." Nobody had informed me of an audit. I checked my email on my phone right there, and there was absolutely nothing. One of the auditors, a thin man with wireframe glasses, stepped forward. "We require administrative access to all server directories, including all personal developer workspaces, to verify compliance with national healthcare data protection standards." Brody watched me closely, waiting for a defensive reaction. I simply unlocked my terminal and stepped aside. "Everything is documented," I said. "You will find that all operations are compliant." The security compliance audit lasted for 4 hours. The corporate auditors reviewed every script, checked the system logs, and examined the permissions for every tool in my personal directory. They found absolutely nothing out of compliance. Every custom tool had a clear purpose, every script was meticulously logged, and every database query was fully secure. When they finished, the thin auditor with the wireframe glasses turned to Brody and nodded. "The directory is entirely compliant," the auditor said. "There are no violations here." Brody's jaw tightened. He had clearly hoped the auditors would find a violation that would give him the grounds to fire me immediately. After the auditors left, Brody cornered me in the hallway outside the server room, his arms crossed and his face dark. "Just because you passed their check does not mean your personal workspace remains," he said, his voice tense and low. "It is a non-standard configuration. It is a security risk, and I want it gone by the end of the week. I do not want any custom folders on my servers, and I will not allow you to run automated scripts that have not been vetted by my team. Deleting those tools will break our automated processes," I warned him. "They are integrated into the nightly maintenance routines and database checks." "Then migrate the code to our official repositories," Brody replied. "Or find another place to work. I don't tolerate developers who think they are above the rules." He walked away before I could respond. That night, I updated my resume and sent it to several contacts in the industry. But before I could secure an interview, Brody made his move. The email arrived at 6:15 on Friday morning, sent to the entire technology department and carbon copied to the executive leadership team. The subject line read Infrastructure Modernization Initiative. The email stated that effective immediately, Vanguard was implementing new standards for server management, and all personal developer directories on company servers would be decommissioned by 4 in the afternoon that day. Any tools or scripts not migrated to official repositories by the deadline would be permanently deleted. Compliance was mandatory, and there would be no exceptions. Brody had sent the email before most of the team was even awake, giving us barely 9 hours to migrate years of complex tools. My phone began buzzing immediately with text messages from panicked developers. Sean Gable called me, his voice filled with frustration. "He is trying to force you out, Derek," Sean said. "Everyone knows you are the only one who actively uses a personal directory to run system maintenance. This is targeted directly at you." "I know," I replied. "What are you going to do?" I asked myself the same question. I could spend the day frantically trying to migrate everything, or I could let him delete the directory and let the consequences fall on him. Then Sean said something that changed everything. "Derek, you know what is actually running from your personal directory, right? The database reconciliation script. The one that syncs the live production database with the historical backup system." My chest tightened as I realized the technical consequences. 10 years ago, when Vanguard migrated to its current database framework, I had written a specialized reconciliation script. It was designed to run automatically every night, checking for data integrity, resolving minor sync errors, and ensuring the backup systems remained identical to the live production database. It had run silently and perfectly for 10 years. Nobody on the current team even remembered it existed because it had never failed. The former director of technology operations had known about it, but he retired 5 years ago, and the technical notes had been archived deep in our systems. Without that script running, the databases would slowly drift apart, causing discrepancies that would corrupt our records. "What happens if that script is deleted?" Sean asked. I pulled up the code on my screen to review it. The script maintained active, persistent database connections to both the primary production servers and the backup storage arrays. If the script was deleted while those active connections were open, the sudden termination of the reconciliation process would cause the databases to desynchronize. To protect the integrity of patient records, the database security protocols would automatically trigger an emergency lockdown, shutting down access to prevent data corruption. If that happened, the entire system would go offline instantly. "Brody does not know about the script," I said, and he did not read the 58-page documentation I sent him. I was not planning sabotage. I was planning absolute compliance with a direct corporate order. Brody wanted my personal directory deleted. I would delete it, but I would do it exactly by the book. I spent the morning preparing a final documentation file, detailing every tool that would be deactivated. At 1 in the afternoon, Brody sent a reminder email stating that the 4 in the afternoon deadline was absolute. I replied to his email, copying the executive leadership team. I stated that my personal directory would be cleared, but noted that the database reconciliation script required specialized migration configuration to avoid system instability. I attached my 58-page documentation. Brody responded at 3:58 in the afternoon with 3 words: "No extensions. Delete." At exactly 4 in the afternoon, I selected the raw positional directory on the server terminal and pressed delete. The system prompted for confirmation. I entered my administrator credentials, and the directory vanished. The screen flickered once, a tiny drop in terminal latency, and then stabilized. My personal directory was permanently gone, along with the database reconciliation script that had run every night for 10 years. At 4:02 in the afternoon, Brody appeared at my desk. He stood there with his arms crossed, wearing a smug expression of victory. "Is the directory cleared?" he asked. "Completely," I replied. "Good," he said, looking down at his phone with a satisfied nod that made me want to roll my eyes. He seemed convinced that he had just achieved a major corporate milestone by deleting my workspace. "I am running an administrative scan now. If I find any traces of your custom scripts left behind, we will be having a conversation with human resources about insubordination." I nodded, packing my laptop into my bag. I stood up and slung the strap over my shoulder. Brody frowned. "Where are you going?" he asked. "It is 4 o'clock on a Friday," I said. "My work is done and I am going home." "We have a technology alignment meeting scheduled for 4:30, Brody said, his voice hardening. "I sent the invitation an hour ago." "I did not accept it," I replied. "My contract specifies regular business hours, and I have weekend plans." Brody stepped closer, trying to block my path. "You have had an attitude problem since the day I arrived, Eric," he whispered, so the remaining staff would not hear. "You think you are indispensable because you built these systems. You think you can ignore my directives, but you are just an employee, and you will align with our new operational standards or you will be replaced." I looked him dead in the eyes. "I think you are so desperate to prove your authority that you cannot tell the difference between optimization and destruction," I said. "You have never actually built a database in your life, so you do not understand what it takes to keep one running." Before Brody could respond, the monitor on the desk behind him flickered and went dark. A second later, the terminal on the adjacent desk displayed a critical connection error in bold text. Then a loud alarm began to chime from the server room down the hallway. My phone buzzed with an urgent text message from Sean Gable. "The production database is completely offline," the message read. "All medical client portals are down." Brody's phone began to ring, and the main desk phone near the entrance started chiming. The color drained from Brody's face. "What is happening?" he muttered, staring at his screen. I walked past him and headed toward the server room. Brody followed me, his footsteps hurried and panicked. Inside the server room, Gordon Pratt, our senior database administrator, was typing frantically at the main console. Sweat was dripping down his face. The database reconciliation process crashed mid-transaction. Gordon yelled over the sound of the server fans. The system detected a sudden loss of the active connection script and triggered an emergency lockdown to prevent corruption of the patient records. Everything is offline. I am trying to run a manual override, but the backup servers are completely unresponsive. How long to bring it back online? Brody demanded, his voice cracking. I do not know, Gordon said, turning to look at us. The reconciliation script that manages the sync is missing. It was running from Derek's personal directory. Brody's head snapped toward me, his face flushing deep red. You deleted a critical database script? He shouted. You sabotaged the system. I pulled out my phone and displayed the email thread. I warned you in writing 3 times that the reconciliation script was running from my directory and required a scheduled maintenance window to migrate safely, I said. You replied at 3:58 and told me to delete everything with no extensions. I followed your direct order. Brody grabbed my phone, reading the emails. His hands were shaking. This is insane, he stammered. I did not know this script was critical. It was detailed on page 17. Section 4 of the documentation I sent you 2 weeks ago, I replied. You chose not to read it. I cannot read 58 pages of technical jargon in my spare time, Brody yelled. Then you should not have ordered the deletion of systems you did not understand, I said. Gordon stopped typing and watched us in silence. The database was completely down, and healthcare clients across the country were locked out of their portals. We stood in the server room as more alarms began to sound. Brody was pacing back and forth, holding his head in his hands. The silence from the main database console was deafening, broken only by the mechanical hum of cooling fans. Gordon looked at me, then at Brody, waiting for someone to make a move. Brody stopped pacing and pointed an accusing finger at me. You knew this would happen, he hissed. You deliberately set this up. I did not set anything up, I replied. I warned you, in writing, with 58 pages of technical details. You chose to ignore it because you wanted to prove your dominance. Now, you have to deal with the consequences of your own decisions. Brody glared at me, his breathing shallow. Fix it, he ordered. Rebuild the script and get the database back online immediately. I cannot do that, I replied. The script was permanently deleted, and the proprietary algorithms within it are my registered intellectual property. Under Title 17, United States Code, Section 106, Vanguard Health Systems no longer holds a license to run that software since my directory was decommissioned. If you attempt to copy the code from your backup tapes or have outside consultants reverse engineer my algorithms, you will be committing willful copyright infringement. That carries statutory damages of up to $150,000 per violation, and I will file a federal lawsuit against this company. Brody's phone rang again. He answered it, and the voice on the other end was loud enough for everyone in the room to hear. It was the chief executive officer, demanding to know why hospitals could not access patient charts. Brody stammered, promising that the technical team was resolving the issue. He hung up and looked at me, his arrogance completely gone. What do you want? He asked quietly. I will need several conditions met in writing before I begin restoring the system, I said. First, I require a formal written statement from the executive board acknowledging that this database outage was the direct result of your administrative directive to delete server infrastructure. Second, I want my full system permissions restored with no management oversight. Third, I want a signed agreement stating that there will be no professional retaliation or negative performance reviews. Fourth, I require a written recommendation letter signed by the chief executive officer. And fifth, I require a consulting bonus of $20,000, paid immediately for the emergency restoration work. Brody looked like he was going to vomit. I cannot authorize a $20,000 bonus, he said. Then call the chief executive officer and let him know why the database will remain offline for the next 10 days, while outside consultants try to rebuild the system for 4 times. My salary, I replied. Brody hesitated, then pulled out his phone and made the call. 10 minutes later, a signed document from the executive board arrived in my inbox, agreeing to all 5 of my terms. I sat down at the terminal and began the recovery process. I worked for 34 hours straight, surviving on black coffee and focus. By Saturday morning at 8:30, I had stabilized the production databases and brought it back online in a limited, read-only mode so clients could access patient records. By Sunday evening, I had successfully reconstructed the core reconciliation framework and verified the data integrity across all backup systems. By Monday morning at 8 o'clock, the database was fully operational and the system was running perfectly. At 9 o'clock on Monday morning, I submitted my formal resignation letter to the Human Resources Department, giving them 3 weeks of professional notice. By 9:30, the Vice President of Technology sent me a personal message thanking me for my outstanding effort during the crisis. By 10 o'clock, the signed recommendation letter from the Chief Executive Officer was delivered to my desk. By 11 o'clock, the $20,000 bonus had cleared in my bank account. Brody Albright was placed on immediate administrative leave that morning, pending an internal investigation into the database crash. 2 weeks later, he was officially terminated for gross negligence and failure to follow internal compliance documentation. During my final 3 weeks, Vanguard brought in an interim director of technology named Judith Drake. She was a practical leader in her early 60s who had spent decades managing healthcare systems. She asked me to sit down with Gordon Pratt and document the new database configuration. On my last day, Judith called me into her office. "I read the investigation report, Derek," she said, offering a warm smile. "You warned him, and he chose to ignore it to prove a point. You handled this situation with absolute professionalism, and you protected your intellectual property." She handed me an envelope containing my final paycheck. "If you ever want to return to Vanguard, the door is open." "I appreciate the offer, Judith," I said, "but I think it is time for me to start something new." 4 months later, I launched my own independent database consulting firm. Business grew rapidly, and within 8 months, I had more medical clients than I could manage alone. 18 months after leaving Vanguard, I hired Sean Gable as my lead systems consultant. We now help healthcare companies across the country audit and secure their database infrastructures, ensuring they avoid the kind of empty management decisions that lead to disaster. And whenever I find a client with a custom server directory, I make sure they read the documentation. Because in this industry, exact compliance is the most powerful tool we have. I walked out of the corporate headquarters that afternoon, holding my final box of personal belongings. The Oregon air was crisp and cool, and I felt a sense of relief that I had not experienced in years. I had spent nearly 2 decades building systems for a company that was willing to let a newcomer dismantle them in a matter of weeks. But I had protected my work, protected my rights, and proved that technical competence cannot be ignored by management. As I drove away from the building, I knew I had made the right decision, and I was ready for whatever came next.